We live in a world with a population of 7.6 billion people. In 1 hour from now, 15,000 babies will have been born across the globe, and 19 million of us will be celebrating a birthday today. But as you watch this, from your place of work, a mode of public transport, or even from the comfort of your own home, thousands of people will be driven from theirs. In fact, the number of people forced to flee their homes in 2015 alone could fill New York, London, and Jakarta combined. Numbers like these are completely unprecedented. This is because they make up the highest level of global displacement on record. We are in the midst of a humanitarian crisis. Of 10 million stateless people worldwide, the Australian Department of Home Affairs reveals that 1,344 of them are in detention in Australia. And Iraq, Syria, Myanmar, Afghanistan, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo make up the top 5 countries asylum seekers came from to Australia in 2015 to 2016. So, the Refugee Council of Australia has defined asylum seekers as people who have sought protection as refugees, but whose claim for refugee status has not yet been assessed. And often when these asylum seekers reach Australian shores, often they have been traumatised by years of violence, persecution, and war. So, being represented by an immigration lawyer can often be the best way for them to gain entry into Australia. However, in August 2017, Australia's then Minister for Immigration and Border Protection, Peter Dutton, argued that immigration lawyers representing asylum seekers trying to stay in the country were un-Australian.
So, okay, Alan Jones comes from Manus Island because he's sick, and the Australian government says, yes, you can come here and get treated. And then, so you know where I'm being treated. Then they say, right, he's fixed and he's okay. How come he gets to the next step with some sort of tricky legal manoeuvre or some pro bono lawyer? How does he get into the act when, in fact, someone should say, right, you'll check out of the hospital here now, like we all check out, and from here on in, back you go? How does it fail in the middle there?
Because there's obviously a lot of information that is provided through social media, through advocates, where people know that some of these people are coming to Australia. The lawyers take out injunctions.
But this is un-Australian behaviour by lawyers, isn't it?
Well, of course it is, and it's gone on for too long. And I think people believe, in a fair go, but this is ripping the system off.
Yes.
And I've said, as we have with visa cancellations and stopping boats, otherwise we aren't going to tolerate it. So these people need to return either back to their country of origin or back to Nauru or Manus once they came, and that's the arrangement. So we've been very clear about it. But you're right; these lawyers have been playing the game with these people who are willing participants, and we're a generous nation, but we are not going to be taken for a ride. And the Prime Minister's been very clear about it. I've been very clear about it, and we're taking action in that regard.
As a law student with a deep interest in human rights law, I was intrigued at how those at the front line of the legal industry, such as law students and legal professionals, would respond to Dutton's pejorative statement. I decided to turn to one of Australia's top legal minds for a response to Peter Dutton's statement. I travelled to Victoria to meet with Melbourne-based barrister, author, and passionate human rights and refugee advocate Julian Burnside. He also just happens to be one of Peter Dutton's most vocal opponents. With over 40 years in the legal industry under his belt, Mr. Burnside is widely recognised for his staunch opposition to the detention of asylum seekers, so much so that he was awarded the Officer of the Order of Australia in 2009 for service as a human rights advocate, particularly for refugees and asylum seekers. As a barrister, he acted for the Chief Civil Liberties Organisation in Victoria in a case against the Australian government over the Tampa affair, which saw the Howard government turn away 433 rescued asylum seekers attempting to enter Australian waters. As a result, Julian fervently condemned the Howard government for the mandatory detention of asylum seekers. Given his long history for advocating for refugee and asylum seeker rights, Julian believes that the statement made by Peter Dutton contravenes the very essence of what it means to be Australian.
I personally think that Peter Dutton is un-Australian, and he's also a dishonest hypocrite, which is not consistent with Australian values. Peter Dutton calls boat people illegal when they don't commit any offence. Peter Dutton claims to be a Christian, and what he does or has done to refugees, boat people especially, is deeply un-Christian. Peter Dutton was recently asked whether some people should be brought from Manus Island to Australia for the mental health treatment that they needed and couldn't get there. And he said that people need to understand that several years of good work could be undone by a single act of compassion. Now, I've never heard of an Australian parliamentarian willing to argue against compassion until he said it on the 23rd of June 2018. I think that is a deeply un-Australian view to have. I thought being Australian meant giving everyone a fair go. Now, if someone falls at your feet asking for help, you don't kick them in the face. That's un-Australian. Peter Dutton is un-Australian, and lawyers, many lawyers who do a lot of pro bono work for refugees, are standing up for real Australian values, which is that you try and give everyone a fair go, you try and give everyone a chance in a system which is grotesquely weighted against their interests.
Julian's opinion mirrors that of one of my fellow law students, Razik Kasimi, who is one of many refugees who have felt disappointed by the unwelcoming attitude directed towards refugees and asylum seekers by certain Australian politicians.
I'm actually a former refugee from Afghanistan. I'm from the ethnic minority Hazara, and I came in 2010. And I'm my fourth year of doing a Bachelor of Law and Justice here at Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane.
As a future legal professional, I thought that Razik might be able to provide some insight into the topic, and discovered that he too disagrees wholeheartedly with the statement that immigration lawyers representing asylum seekers trying to enter Australia are un-Australian. When I asked Razik what being un-Australian meant to him, he had this to say.
I think Mr. Dutton is a good definition for that. From time to time, we've seen politicians like him stand up in the parliament and make statements that are hurtful, that actually create division in the community, and stand up instead of welcoming asylum seekers, refugees, and new migrants in this country. He attacks very vulnerable and minorities, and it's absolutely unacceptable. And it just shocks me to my core to see people like him doing that. A politician is supposed to represent what is in the best interest of the public and what is in the best interest of us. And if they act contrary to that, they're not doing their job properly.
Julian Burnside's words resonated with me, because the mere act of assisting someone in need is the very essence of what it means to be Australian, to truly give someone a fair go. And his words mirrored Razik's. As someone of a persecuted minority who had to flee their homeland, is Peter Dutton suggesting that lawyers and the Australian public show no compassion at all to people in similar situations trying to enter our country? To me, someone like Razik truly embodies this Australian identity put forward by Julian Burnside, because he consistently and without fail always aims to give back to the community through programs such as the Queensland Program of Assistance to Survivors of Torture and Trauma. I keep seeing this horribly negative stigma surrounding refugees and asylum seekers that is perpetuated by people like Peter Dutton. This unnecessary propaganda and fear-mongering attempts to turn us away from being compassionate towards refugees and asylum seekers. It attempts to guilt and to shame lawyers into not representing them for fear that they might appear un-Australian. But for people like Julian Burnside, like Raziq Kasimi, they aren't fearful of this. In fact, Peter Dutton's rhetoric is only encouraging them to work harder in support of refugees and asylum seekers, to give them a voice when they don't have one. That is being Australian, and that is upholding our Australian values. We have to ask ourselves the question, what are people like Peter Dutton scared of? Why are they so fearful of and so opposed to assisting people who, as Julian Burnside stated, are falling at our feet asking for help? How can this be in defence of upholding Australian values? Unfortunately, we will never know the answer to that. During the making of this documentary, I made contact with Peter Dutton twice for a response to the opinions put forward by the interviewees. However, all I received was a generated email advising me that he would be in contact soon, which he never did. In a quest that led me through interviews with the most inspirational people I have met, I learnt that for those in the legal industry, representing and assisting refugees and asylum seekers means simply affording them their basic rights as humans. And if doing that is un-Australian, then I suppose I want to be un-Australian too.